Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz, Shauketaly.
And a very good evening to you and very warm welcome to Newsline Live. And this evening we've got a very informed guest who knows all about international relations, and with the visit of the US Secretary of State and so on, and the recent visit from the big wigs from China, we thought we'd have this person here on the program and see what it's all about. And that person is none other than Ms. Tamara Kunanayakam, former representative of Sri Lanka to the United Nations. And very good evening to you, madam.
Good evening, Faraz.
Can I start by asking you, what precisely is non-aligned? If a country is said to be non-aligned, what does that mean?
Well, non-aligned is associated with the non-aligned movement, which is a movement of countries from Africa, Asia primarily, that came together in Bandung as newly independent states in order to defend their newly gained independence and to prevent a reoccupation of their countries by foreign powers. So right. It's a movement that's based on principles. Initially, the principles were formulated by Mao Zedong, but China, in its first bilateral agreement with India, which was basically mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, non-aggression, non-intervention, mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. Now, these were 5 principles that were adopted in Bandung, along with 5 other principles that had to do with multilateralism and right to self-determination, which was adopted in Bandung and became the principles on which the non-aligned movement was formed. Right. Non-aligned does not mean it's not a negative concept in the sense we are not aligned with this or that power. It means you come together as a collective group of countries that defend their newly won independence, and help other countries that are still under colonization to become independent and to ensure that you don't become colonized again.
In that context, Ms. Kunanayakam, does this mean that Sri Lanka has lost some of that non-alignment by being sort of leaning towards China in terms of infrastructure development and so on?
Well, I mean, again, non-alignment non-aligned movement is a movement of countries that were formerly colonized. China was a colony, also formerly colonized by the same colonial powers. And the principles of non-alignment are the principles that were initially formulated by China and Mao Zedong in particular, and expressed by the Premier Zhou Enlai. So lean towards China does not mean that you are aligned, because non-alignment in that particular context was also linked to the great powers, which is on the one hand the USA and on the other hand the Soviet Union. And very clearly, even Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru of India expressed that point of view, that he was completely opposed to any alliance, military alliance with the United States, and he aggressively fought against SEATO and CENTO, both short-lived defense alliances led by the United States. Asia, we have to understand Asia. Asia has been Asian. We have an Asianness. We have refused as Asian countries to be led by an outside power, the United States, ever since the Second World War. Now today, with the US, with its new strategy of the Indo-Pacific, Asia has disappeared. There is no Asia in the Indo-Pacific. There is India and there is the Pacific. Asia has gone because Asia has always been very proud of its Asianness and has refused to be led by an external power, like especially the United States.
But now when we look at the level of the national debt towards China and the level of Chinese investments in Sri Lanka, on the one hand, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa's statement to Indian journalists that in response to a question said that, oh, you know, we will treat India good too. And then you have the United States on the other side, and main focus being MCC and so on. It looks to me like for all this non-aligned movement and membership of that movement and so on, the actions of our politicians is almost similar to selling bits and pieces of our country. China, India, and now who knows what with the United States. Am I right in thinking that?
Well, I want to come to the question of debt, because I know this, the US and those who are anti-Chinese or the anti-China propaganda speaks a lot about the Chinese debt trap.
Yeah.
Now, let's be clear, Sri Lanka's foreign debt to China is only 10% of its total foreign debt.
Yeah.
The rest comes from the West, Western financial institutions or Western countries. And don't forget, Western debt comes with conditionalities.
Yeah.
So you have the structural adjustment programs that is associated with the World Bank and the IMF. Both of these institutions are controlled by the United States, 20% US controlled. They come with conditions to restructure the state, which means cut your public expenditure, increase your exports, devalue your currency. Now the Chinese debt does not come with those conditionalities. In fact, the Chinese president, Xi, has made it very clear, the Chinese model is not for export, which is completely the opposite of the Western lending that comes from there. So we have Sri Lankan debt to China is very minor. If you look at it globally, even in terms of Africa, and I want to point this out, the foreign direct, since 2017, foreign direct investment in Africa, Western was 60%, Chinese was only 8% of the FDI to Africa went from China. And the Chinese have decided to cancel all their interest-free loans to Africa. Now that hasn't come from the West. So it's totally different. We are not in
Will
the
the Chinese
debt trap.
do the same to us? Will they cancel out the interest on our
If we have
debt?
interest-free loans that were given to Africa, now we are not.
But here we've been given interest-bearing loans.
It's at concessional rates
But
and
some of them
without
are-
conditions. And without
Yes,
conditions.
but some of them are at commercial rates.
Well, we have to negotiate. If Sri Lanka dares to reschedule, talk to the other side. What I'm hearing is, we are not going to reschedule, we are not going to ask for cancellation of debt, we are going to pay the debt at any cost. And that's why we are hanging on to this MCC 480 million, which is nothing, which is peanuts.
Well, our
480 million.
group's worth more than that.
Our goods, we are selling our country for 480 million.
Our
We are
group-
selling our land, we are selling our resources. That's what the MCC is all about. MCC is about, first of all, it's about completely, fundamentally restructuring the state, even before we get the money. Because that's what is unique about the MCC aid, is that the conditions have to be implemented before you get the money. The money is only a reward for having restructured your state in a manner that the entire economy is controlled from outside and political decisions are made outside. So this is what we are expected to do under MCC. And don't forget, MCC is not a development aid money. It is a defense pact. It is a package which comes together with AXA, SOFA and MCC. It's part of the US National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy, which was inaugurated by George W. Bush, and it was reinforced and reiterated by President Trump when he said specifically that it's going to be a coercive tool for greater interconnectivity in so-called Indo-Pacific region. So it is a coercive tool which is part of a defense pact, which is not for the defense of your country, my country, or Asian countries. It's for US self-defense. So it's very different from any other aid that you will get from any other country.
On what conditions should Sri Lanka accept that? Or should they simply not accept it?
No, I mean, you cannot, unless you want to be part of the US military alliance, with the, at the moment, the primary focus of the US strategy is war against China. That's why the US Secretary of State Pompeo is coming here. He is coming here because he is their goal is to prepare for war against China. That is the new China policy that he announced in July of this year. Pompeo announced a new China policy. He's saying we are no longer talking about engagement with China. We are no longer talking about bilateral issues like as in the South China Sea. We are talking about regime change in China, because we have to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party. We have to overthrow the Marxist-Leninist ideology and the People's Liberation Army. Now that's regime change. And are we going to be involved in a military alliance that's going to overthrow the regime in China, which is a friendly nation? Don't forget, in the Human Rights Council in Geneva, it is not China that brings a resolution against Sri Lanka. It is the United States. And who defends Sri Lanka in Geneva is China, Russia, and Cuba, not the United States. So let's be very clear about that. Are we then going to get in now all of a sudden into an alliance with the US, whose purpose is to go to war in our region, using our country as a base in order to fight their war with China for US self-defense? Are we ready for that? That's the question. If we are ready, sign MCC, AXA, and so forth. AXA is already signed. But I can tell you that they will have the majority of the people of this country against it. And I will be I will definitely be among them. I won't be leading. I don't pretend to want to be a leader. But there are people out there who will refuse to accept US domination. We have come through 30 years of war. Don't forget, fighting for our sovereignty and our territorial integrity against the LTTE. We are not ready for another war and somebody else's war against our friends. A non-aligned, I mean, it is a founder of the non-aligned, it is not a member, it's an observer state, but we are not going to fight a friendly nation.
On that note, Tamara Kunanayakam, we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll discuss this a little bit more. Don't go away. After all, you're tuned to Newsline Live.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz, Shauketaly.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. A few moments ago, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arrived in Sri Lanka, and we are in conversation with Ms. Tamara Kunanayakam, who is of course Sri Lanka's permanent representative to the UN. And what choices, Ms. Kunanayakam, do we have? What choices does Sri Lanka have now?
Well, Sri Lanka has only one choice, and that is to defend the national interests of Sri Lanka. And our national interests are to defend our sovereignty, our independence, and our territorial integrity. That is the priority. It is not, it should be Sri Lanka first. And how are we going to defend these interests of Sri Lanka? It's only through a multilateral mechanism, not alone. Now, the United States wants to deal with countries bilaterally, simply because it is a power, it is a hegemonic power, and it can put pressure and coerce smaller countries into forcing us into join them or signing an agreement or going into war with them. So we cannot deal with countries bilaterally, but we can do it only within a multilateral forum. So there is the United Nations. The United Nations is based on the principles of, it's the only fora that defends the sovereign equality of states. Independence, non-aggression, non-intervention. These are the principles that were further defined in the UN Friendly Relations Declaration, which was signed by the United Nations and is the basic principles that guide international relations. The US, what it wants is, it has a vision, its vision of the world is a unilateral vision of the world.
Yeah.
that is based on American self-preservation, not on reciprocity. They're not interested in preserving Sri Lanka or Sri Lanka's independence. So we have the choice, and the US choice of unilateralism can only be imposed through war. The US strategy or ideology is that you can prevent war only by preparing for war. Whereas the United Nations, the UN Charter, prohibits war. So all conflicts, any conflict has to be resolved peacefully, by peaceful means. So we have no other choice than peace.
So in short, we need to defend our integrity. We need to maintain our integrity.
We have to do that, and we
cannot be compromised.
Cannot be compromised, and it has to be done only collectively. And I would say this is the moment to tell Mr. Pompeo that he has to respect. First of all, the US has to ratify the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, which they have not ratified. And they have backed out of a lot of UN conventions, basic conventions.
So like the US is cherry picking.
It's cherry picking, and it's imposing their rule on us, and their values on us, and their values are not our values.
So that's not acceptable to us.
It's not acceptable. Now, I would call upon the government of Sri Lanka today to implement, as a matter of urgency, the UN Declaration on the Indian Ocean as a zone of peace, which means no foreign military installations, no foreign military bases, no foreign weapons of mass destruction here, no flyovers of military planes or military ships. That is the UN Declaration on the Indian Ocean as a zone of peace. That's the only thing that Sri Lanka can do today, and we have the United Nations with us on that.
I just want to read this message out. It's not really a question, it's more like a statement. Please tell Ms. Kunanayakam that she is spot on, and we have great respect for her candid views, especially on the eve of the visit of Mr. Pompeo. So there you go. The public like what you're saying, because probably you are reflecting what the public have on their minds. How will this government, considering the economic plight not only of the world but our very own economic issues, how will this government manage? Will it have to be exclusively China? Because as you say, their aid and their loans and their investments are not loaded with conditions, whereas from the West they are usually accompanied by various sometimes tenuous and arduous links and conditions.
I think it's important that Sri Lanka keeps in mind that Sri Lanka is Sri Lanka and we come first, which also means to be independent in terms of foreign policy, we have to be economically independent. To be economically independent, we have to build our own economy. I mean, we have examples. Look at Cuba. Cuba is a country which is under more than 60 years of a criminal US blockade. But they feed everyone. Everybody has a house. Everybody has a job. They have one of the best health systems in the world, better than in the United States. They have one of the best education systems in the world. They are one of the most advanced in biotechnology. So you can develop your country. We are a rich country. You know, we are far more rich in a way than Cuba is, because we have more water than they have. We have rivers. We have mineral resources. We have rare earth elements, which is needed for building spaceships. So we have everything that we need here. We have to develop that economy and not always depend on other countries. We cannot always be like beggars. We have to be proud of being Sri Lankan. We have to stand tall. And we are on our knees. Though we see the United States as something important and as being powerful and tall, only for one reason, because we are on our knees. Stand up. And let's be Sri Lankan, let's develop our country, let's be independent, let's be sovereign, and let's be proud of being Sri Lankan. And we don't have to always look to other countries to help us, but we have to work together, because we have to complement each other, but on the basis of sovereign equality. We have to relate to other countries as equals. not as unequals.
The counter to some of what you say, Ms. Kunanayakam, is that China, Russia and Cuba, they support us at the UN, it's true, but they are all sort of dictatorship governments. The United States has a democracy.
Well, I mean, it depends what you mean by democracy and depends what you mean by dictatorship.
Yeah.
If you look at the United States and the levels of inequality and poverty,
Yeah.
and the violence and the outright killings of black people, shooting them down like dogs on the street. We don't even shoot our dogs like like they do.
Yeah.
If you call that a democracy, then I don't want that democracy. And if you look at what Cuba has done to its people, and if I lived in Cuba for 3 years, I know how they live and how proud they are to be Cuban and to have the society that they have built. I would rather be than a dictatorship, if you call it a dictatorship.
Right.
I don't call Cuba a dictatorship.
No. You served there, didn't you?
I served there for 3 years and I'm very proud to have served in Cuba.
Our viewership is absolutely chuffed with your presence in what you're saying. There are several offers of, including marriage offers. They love you. So I can honestly tell you that we haven't had guests with that kind of feedback.
Well, I'd like to say I love my country and I love my people, and that's fundamental.
That is. So, but how are we going to get? All this is jolly good, and so on. But you know, there's the thing that makes it all go around: money. And does China have enough to give us unconditionally, or are they going to extract a piece of our flesh each time, like the Hambantota port?
Yes, but again we're coming back to asking another country to help us with money. We have a central bank. We have rupees. We have the money. We can produce that money. We can print money if we need it without having to get into debt with a foreign country, because one of the biggest problems with foreign debt, especially with the West, is that we have to return the money in dollars, and to return the money in dollars we have to export, or we need foreign direct investments, or we need to have some kind of trafficking in foreign currency. Whereas if you get into debt in rupees, you can print the rupee and you get, it's a local money. Now the Chinese, with the Chinese for instance, we can also negotiate to pay not in dollars but in our own currency. I remember when I was a permanent representative in Geneva, I was approached by countries that were under sanctions. For instance, oil from Iran. We could have bought oil from Iran for rupees. We didn't have to pay them dollars, because we are paying, you know, as you know, most of the countries today in Africa, for instance, they're de-dollarizing. That means they're not using the dollar anymore for trade, because it's only when you use the dollar that you need the dollar to pay back.
I need to share these, some of these statements and questions. One says, we need you to be our president. Another one says, excellent, Tamara. Another one says, Tamara Kunanayakam, you should be appointed as the United Nations High Commissioner. And it goes on and on. The public love you. And the public, thank you very much for watching Tamara Kunanayakam on Newsline Live. Please come back anytime you want on our network. We're proud to have you.
Thank you, Faraz. Thank you.
The pleasure's all ours. And that's the way it was on Newsline Live. Take care. Have a wonderful evening ahead of you. And of course, as always, God bless you.